The paper bag sat in the passenger seat the whole drive down, and Claire Weston kept her eyes on the road, the way you do when you're carrying something you don't fully understand. She was 24 years old. She worked for Aldrich and Rowe, attorneys at law, out of Cookville, and she had been doing probate work for 11 months, which was long enough to know that most final wishes were ordinary. A ring to a niece, a truck to a neighbor, the kind of small gestures people make when they've run out of time and want something to land right. Mr. Aldrich had handed her the bag that morning with a photocopy of the handwritten note inside and said, "Drive it down to Millhaven. Read the wish aloud at the VFW post. Leave the jacket. Simple." She'd be back before lunch. The note was written in a clean, level hand on plain notebook paper, undated, no flourish. It said, "I want my field jacket to go to post 118. Give it to whoever's there. Tell them it kept me warm when I needed it most. That's all. Nora Calhoun." Claire had looked up Nora Calhoun that morning, out of habit more than anything else. 29 when she died in February. A car accident on the interstate outside of Crossville, icy road. No other cars involved. She'd run the hardware store on Millhaven's main square for 4 years after her mother passed. Before that, the Army. Beyond the enlistment dates in the public record, Claire hadn't found much. A gap of 6 years. An honorable discharge at 25. No medals listed anywhere she could see. The VFW post sat at the edge of town where the main road bent south. A low brick building with a flagpole, and a handicapped ramp and a hand-lettered sign in the window that said, "Open Wednesdays and Saturdays." It was Wednesday. The parking lot held 7 cars and a truck with a Purple Heart plate. Inside, the air smelled of old coffee and something that had been cigarette smoke for a long time, and never fully left. American and Tennessee flags flanked a small stage at the far end. The walls held photographs and shadow boxes and a glass case near the door with challenge coins and unit patches and a single silver star in its velvet fold. Long tables ran down the middle, and 9 men sat at them, 8 older, the youngest close to 70, and one she didn't notice at first in the back corner, wearing a plain gray shirt and reading glasses and not looking up when she walked in. The post commander was a man named Harlow, a Vietnam veteran, barrel-chested and deliberate in the way of someone who had been running meetings for 30 years. He shook her hand and introduced her around. She recognized the names in pieces: Akers, who ran the feed store; Pennington, who coached Little League; Greer, who'd served in Korea and sat at the near end of the table with a coffee cup and a permanent expression of measured skepticism. She read the note aloud. The room was quiet in the way small rooms get when something ordinary is being treated seriously. "Nora Calhoun," Harlow said after she finished. He looked at the other men. "Hardware store girl. Kessler's daughter-in-law's friend." He paused. "Good kid. Young." 29, Claire said. Harlow nodded. He looked at the bag. "She have any family to pass it to instead?" "None listed." The note was specific about the post. She lifted the jacket from the bag and laid it on the table. It was olive drab, worn soft at the elbows. The collar broken in from long use. No insignia, no patches. A field jacket like 1,000 others, the kind sold at any surplus store. The kind that didn't say anything about who wore it, except that someone had worn it for a long time. Greer looked at it from down the table. He was 81, a lean man with a veteran's habit of sizing things up fast and speaking what he concluded. "Rear echelon," he said, not unkindly. "Nothing against the girl, but that's a garrison jacket. No unit, no theater patch. One of the support girls." Nobody disagreed. Harlow was already reaching for it to find a hook on the wall. The envelope fell out of the inside pocket when he lifted it. It was a standard legal envelope, unsealed, the flap tucked in rather than gummed. Harlow looked at it the way you looks at something that has no business being where it is. He turned it over, nothing written on the outside. He held it out to Claire. "Yours to open, I think, since you're representing the estate." She took it. She started to reach inside. "Ma'am." The voice came from the back corner, quiet and direct. "If you'll permit me." The man in the gray shirt had taken off his reading glasses. He was standing now, and Claire saw that he was not whatever she had assumed him to be. A relative, maybe, or a retired local, because there was a quality to the way he stood that she couldn't name except to say that the room seemed to rearrange itself around him without anyone meaning for it to. He was not tall. He had a plain face and close-cut gray hair and the kind of stillness that doesn't come from calm. It comes from practice. "I drove up from Nashville this morning," he said. "When I heard about the jacket," he looked at Harlow. "I should have introduced myself. I apologize for that." He looked at Claire. My name is Lieutenant General Dale Morrow. I served with Nora Calhoun. Or more accurately, I served alongside her, which isn't the same thing. The room held its breath. I'd like to read what's in that envelope, he said. If you'll allow it. Claire handed it to him. He didn't open it dramatically. He just opened it, the way you open something you've been waiting a long time to say out loud. He unfolded 2 pages. He read to himself for a moment, 3 seconds, 4, and his jaw set in the way men's jaws set when they are composing themselves. Then he looked up. Nora Calhoun, he said, enlisted in the Army at age 19. She spent her first 2 years in conventional signals, which is what her discharge record reflects because her subsequent service was classified. At 21, she was selected for evaluation under the Army's Special Forces Assessment and Selection Program. Not as a candidate for the groups, but as a contracted assessment evaluator and combat tracker. The program had never run a woman through full field evaluation. She was the first. He paused. She was also the only one who passed. Greer had set down his coffee cup. She completed 2 deployments in bed with 5th Special Forces Group. One in the Horn of Africa, one in a theater I'm not going to name in a public room. Her role was to train SF operators in ground tracking methodology, advance observation, and pattern-of-life analysis in low-signature environments. Meaning, she was the one who taught the Green Berets how to read ground. She was 23 years old the first time she deployed. She was 24 when she identified an insurgent network pattern that, according to the after-action assessment, prevented a coordinated attack on a forward operating position that housed over 60 personnel. He stopped. The citation uses the word prevented. The men who were at that position use a different word. Nobody asked what word. She separated from the Army at 25. Administrative. Her choosing. The classification on her record remained in place, which is why none of you knew. Which is why she ran a hardware store and never said a thing. He refolded the pages slowly. The assessment coin was awarded to her at separation. There has been one issued in the program's history she had it. He looked at Harlow, who nodded without speaking. She asked that the jacket go here, Morrow said. I think she knew someone would find the envelope. I think she always figured someone would eventually look, and she wanted it to be the right room. He laid the pages on the table. She never asked for anything else. The room was the kind of quiet that happens when 8 men, who have each separately spent years in places where silence meant something, are all silent at the same time. Harlow reached carefully for the jacket. He turned it over in his hands, ran his thumb along the inner lining near the left breast, where it sat slightly stiff. He looked at Morrow, who nodded. Pennington had a pocket knife. He opened the lining along the seam 2 inches careful, and drew out a thin piece of cloth folded. Inside the cloth, a badge, small and unadorned, the kind of thing you wouldn't recognize if you didn't know what it was, and beneath it a coin. Brass, roughly finished. On one face, a tracking symbol in relief, the kind drawn from old Army field methodology doctrine that most soldiers have never seen outside a manual. On the other, a simple inscription, assessment complete, 1, 1. Not one of many, the only one. Pennington held it on his palm and passed it to the man beside him, who passed it on. It moved down the table the way the most important things in a room always move. Slowly, each man looking at it as if learning something. When it reached Greer, he held it for a long time, was 81 years old. He had landed at Incheon in 1950. He had seen things that still came to him some nights. And he had long ago made his peace with the fact that young people couldn't know what war cost, and he had never held that against them. What he held against people was a kind of carelessness about what had been paid. He had looked at the jacket and seen garrison and seen nothing, and he sat with that for a moment now. He took off his cover. He set it on the table in front of him, crown down, the way veterans set a cover when they mean to honor something and not just follow a rule. He did not say anything. He didn't need to. Around the table, one by one, the other men stood. No one called them to attention. No one gave a word of command. Harlow rose first, and then the man beside him, and by the time it reached the far end, all of them were on their feet, and the room that had been an ordinary Wednesday morning in a small brick building at the edge of a small Tennessee town was something else now. A place where the weight of what someone had done was finally allowed to sit in the open. Morrow set the citation pages on the table next to the coin. He stood too, but he didn't do anything else. He had driven 4 hours and said what needed saying, and he understood that the rest of it now belonged to the room, to the men in it. to the post on the wall where the jacket would hang. Claire Weston stood near the door and did not move. She was 24 years old and had driven down from Cookville with a paper bag in the passenger seat expecting to be back before lunch, and she was holding her notepad in both hands without having written a single word on it since she walked in. She's watching Greer, who was still standing with his cover on the table in front of him, looking at the coin that Pennington had just set down at the center of the table where everyone could see it. She had grown up in Tennessee. She had heard the word service her whole life. At school, at church, at the 4th of July, at every sporting event where the anthem played and people put their hands over their hearts. She had heard it so many times it had gone smooth, like a word you say too often until it loses its edges. She was standing in a room now where it had its edges back. Harlow walked to the wall behind the stage, to the long row of hooks where coats and covers had hung for 40 years. He chose a hook at the center of the row, in the best position, the one that would be seen when you walked in. He hung the jacket there. He smoothed the collar down with both hands, the way you do with something you intend to leave a long time, the way her own hands must have worn it smooth over years she'd spent in places no one in this room had known about until 10 minutes ago. He turned back to the room. Nobody had sat down yet. Nora Calhoun, he said. Just the name. Nothing else. The general set the coin on the table beside the citation and left it there when he finally gathered his things to go. He shook Harlow's hand at the door, nodded at the men, and gave Claire a brief, quiet look. Not the look of someone assessing her, but the look of someone who was glad she'd been there to witness it. "Make sure, Mr. Aldrich files the full citation with the estate record," he said. "She earned it. It should be attached to her name." He walked out into the Tennessee morning, got into a car she hadn't noticed when she arrived, and left. Claire stood in the doorway for another moment. The old men were settling back into their chairs. Greer had set his coffee cup aside. Pennington was folding the cloth that had held the badge, doing it the way you fold a flag, slowly, with intention. On the wall, the jacket hung. She drove back to Cookville with the paper bag folded flat on the passenger seat and the photocopy of the handwritten note beside it. "I want my field jacket to go to Post 118. She had read those words that morning and heard a simple kindness, a soft final wish from a young woman who hadn't survived to old age. She read them again now in her head and heard something different. A woman who had gone to the places nobody gets to hear about, who had taught elite soldiers how to read the ground beneath their feet, who had come home and run a hardware store and never said a word about any of it, and who had, in the end, left one envelope in one pocket for the one room she trusted to know what it meant. Not for recognition, not even for honor, just so someone would know. The road unspooled ahead of her, straight and flat, and Claire Weston drove north with both hands on the wheel and did not turn on the radio.